Thank you very much, Madam Chair, my distinguished cabinet colleagues, members of the diplomatic corps, our gracious hosts this evening, the President and executives and members of the Guyana Manufacturing and Services Association, ladies and gentlemen. If you are a sprinting person or a person involved in track and field, in particular track, you know that getting out of the blocks early invariably gives you a big advantage. And so I'm forced to reflect on the fact that the tourism sector got out of the blocks early and had their event on Tuesday, as a result of which they had the privilege of having as their star attraction no less a person than His Excellency the President of our Republic, Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali. But Rafiq and Ramsey, having gotten out of the blocks a nanosecond after the tourism industry did, and having to settle for Wednesday rather than Tuesday, regrettably, you are now condemned to making do with me rather than President Ali. And so on that note, permit me first of all to apologize to you on behalf of President Ali, who would very much have liked to have been here. And in fact, I believe some of us, myself included, were still holding out hope that he would be here. I had a look at that huge, sumptuous dinner and I thought I could take my time with this dinner if President Ali was going to be here, because I would then be able to sit down and enjoy dinner while he did the hard work up here. But alas, that was not to be. But Rafiq, to you and your executive and your members, like I said, President Ali has asked me to apologize to you for his inability to be here this evening. And the analogy to your being condemned tonight notwithstanding, I consider it a great privilege to be able to represent President Ali at this very important occasion. The GMSA is celebrating 62 years of its existence. Hence, of course, the 60, I think the screen made reference to 62 years, the 62nd membership. I think the Legacy Awards made reference to 62 years of membership. And of course, you're marking the occasion with your 30th annual awards ceremony. And we have only to look at, there was that beautiful black and white screen that highlighted the original members of the GMSA. And perhaps it was propitious that that screen that highlighted the 4 or 5, the original members, Edward B. Behari Limited, Modern Industries, I think it was Banks DIH, Sterling Products. These are old Guyanese companies, titans of the Guyanese manufacturing landscape. Perhaps it is propitious that that presentation came immediately after Ramsey introduced us to the newest cohort of manufacturers in Guyana, the micro enterprises, now manufacturing and packaging remarkably beautiful products, oftentimes in very small and modest enterprises, but world-class products, and using world-class technology, the most modern of technology, to market their products. In the first instance, to anybody in Guyana, and no doubt, and inevitably, in the shortest possible space of time, to the rest of the world. And we have just to look around this room, or to look at the roster of the GMSA's membership, to be seized with the fullness, with a full sense of how much the manufacturing and services landscape of Guyana has changed over those 62 years, and by extension, how much the Guyanese economy has changed over those 62 years, or even over the 30 years since you've been having these annual awards ceremonies. I could, of course, give you the usual speech about how incredibly exciting things are in Guyana today. Others before me have alluded to this. And indeed, things are incredibly exciting. The prospects are brighter than they've ever been at any time in our country's history. You know the astronomical rates of economic growth that our country is realizing. And you know that that growth is more broad-based than it has ever been at any time in our country's history. You know, for example, that the non-oil economy in Guyana is growing, has been growing since 2021 at an average of more than 10% per annum. Grew by more than 13% last year, will grow in 2025 by more than 13% again. You know that the services sector, which of course comprises a significant part of your membership, grew by an average of 10% over the last 4 years, and the manufacturing sector at an average of 13% since 2021. You know that private sector credit has been growing rapidly by 73.4% since 2020. You know that credit to manufacturing has has more than doubled between 2020 and 2024, and the credit to the services sector has almost doubled since 2020, has grown by more than 80% since 2020. You know too that since 2020 the quality, and there are bankers in the room who will tell you if you don't know, that the quality of their lending portfolios has improved dramatically, with the non-performing loan ratio moving from 10.8% in 2020 to 1.8% in 2020, at the end of 2024. And what that points to is, of course, the underlying strength of your businesses and of other businesses in the private sector, because you've been able to build strong businesses with good bankable projects. You've been able to go to the banking sector and mobilize financing, like I said, almost doubling credit to the private sector in the services sector, and more than doubling in the manufacturing sector. So you've been able to put together very eminently eligible and attractive bankable projects which you've taken to the banking sector. You've mobilized financing. You've established and grown your businesses. And this is why we are here, to celebrate these remarkable successes. You know this story because you live it every day. And even if we are raised in an environment that drills into our respective heads that we must be conservative and modest and we mustn't celebrate our successes, the truth is that you have done incredibly well. You have done incredibly well. And I believe that we mustn't be shy of speaking about the remarkable manner in which the private sector has responded to the policy environment that we created since we returned to government in 2020, and how the private sector has responded to the new and emerging opportunities in this very new and different economic landscape. You also know the exciting future that lies ahead of us. You've heard from us on multiple occasions. You've heard, of course, from President Ali. Most recently, he spoke, well, of course, he spoke last night. But you heard him speak extensively at Expo, at the opening ceremony of Expo, where he spoke at length about the incredibly exciting 5 years ahead of us and the vast array of initiatives that our government will be implementing, much of which you are already familiar with, I'm sure, and a large part of which you can see because it's there being built out in front of your eyes. The industrial development at Wales, for example, with the landing of our first gas pipeline, which will see the gas-to-energy project completed, which will more than double our electricity generating capacity, and which will enable us to reduce by 50% to halve the cost of electricity to all consumers in Guyana, industrial, commercial, and residential. And because many of you are manufacturers, you know better than perhaps anybody else, anywhere else in the world, you know how important having adequate, reliable, and affordable energy, how important that is to a viable, and even more so a globally competitive manufacturing enterprise. You know that better than anybody else. You know of the investments that we're making more broadly in the energy sector, including a modern transmission and distribution network to offtake the additional electricity that we'll be generating. You know of the investments that we're making in transitioning to cleaner and more renewable energy, including, of course, the almost 100 megawatts of solar power that we are installing, the RFP that we've just republished to relaunch the Amila Falls hydropower project. You know, too, the investments that we're making in transport infrastructure. And here I must in particular acknowledge the presence of my distinguished cabinet colleague, the Minister of Public Works, who is leading this work, Minister Ejil, improving connectivity with our neighbors, the road to Brazil, the bridge to Suriname, additional infrastructure to open up more productive land. We have said we will open up more than 100,000 acres of land over the next 5 years, building out new roads, opening up more land. You know this story. You know, too, the investments that we're making to improve the quality of life enjoyed by the Guyanese population, investments in education and health, ensure that we have a healthy and well-educated population with the right kinds of skills that you need to staff your operations. And then you would have heard just a few weeks ago, right here in this room, President Ali convened a special summit on Berbice and the Berbice Industrial Development Agenda, including the planned landing of our second gas pipeline in Berbice in the Crab Island region, and the second wave of industrial development that will unleash, including the potential for more electricity generation, the potential for fertilizer production, the potential for value-added production operations that we have hitherto been unable to host in Guyana, such as capabilities to process our bauxite ore, the potential to develop new industries like energy-intensive industries like data centers, etc. I believe their life. I look around this room and I saw many faces, I'm seeing tonight many faces that I've seen at many of these events. And I know that you've heard this speech on many occasions. You will hear it again. I promise you, we will not stop speaking about it. Because it's important that we are all aware of where our country is going. It's important that you know our government's policy priorities. Of course, our priorities are informed by yours, but it's important for you to know and to ensure that our priorities are aligned, yours and ours. And so we will constantly have these conversations. But I want today not necessarily, I want today not to give you the long form version of that speech. You'll be relieved to know those are only my introductory remarks. I'm coming on to the meat of my remarks now. I don't want today to give you the long form version of that speech, because I believe you know it. I want to spend a few minutes, and Sham Nocta tempted me. He said he knows that I'm working on the budget and I'll be presenting the budget speech in another month's time or so. So he said, is it your plan to use tonight as the dry run for the budget speech? And I said to him, big dinner notwithstanding, I promise you that I'm not going to use tonight as the dry run. I want to use this evening, I want to use just the next few minutes this evening to speak about something else that I believe is very important and that we speak about but that we don't necessarily put a label on, but that we must all constantly be mindful of, that we must never forget. The reality is that notwithstanding the fact that our economy is doing so well, and we are doing incredibly well, and like I said, some of that is because of, a lot of that is because of good government policy and strong government leadership, and a lot of that is also about you taking risks, raising money, and growing your businesses, and we both deserve some credit for that. Notwithstanding that the economy is doing as incredibly well as it is, the reality is that we still live in an extremely uncertain and unpredictable world. That's the reality. And I want to speak a little bit, and in fact I should say to you why I want to spend a few minutes speaking about what I'm going to speak about today. I get the sense sometimes that we are living in an era of sound bites, and that we are living in an era of I'm trying to find the right words here. Promises and out-promises. We as a government take very seriously what we promise because we intend to deliver on all of our promises. And those who will never or have a slim likelihood of ever being called upon to deliver on their promises have the luxury of being able to promise anything under the sun. And so I want to spend today speaking a little bit about the uncertainties of the world in which we live, and in particular, speaking about what responsible policy making and responsible government is about in a world like the world in which we live. And why do I say that we live in an uncertain world? Everybody in this room, I see a lot of young people, but I don't see any children in the room. Everybody in this room has been alive long enough. I see a lot of young people, not children. All of us have been alive long enough to remember an era when oil was $138 a barrel, and we can remember, and this is within our living and indeed our recent memory, we can remember, and we should remember, not only the era of oil being $138 a barrel, but we've also, in recent memory, lived through an era when oil was as low as $13 a barrel. And I'm sure that everybody in this room can remember that time. It really is not that long ago. And the reality is that oil was not, it did not stay at $138 a barrel for very long. Just 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, oil was $98 a barrel. It's not $98 a barrel today. It's closer to maybe 60-something dollars a barrel today. That's almost a third less than it was 2.5 years ago. That's the reality of the world in which we live. Gold is, of course, an important contributor to our economy. And all of us in this room, we celebrate the fact, of course, that gold today is $4,000 an ounce. But we can all, in this room, remember a period when we were excited about gold crossing the $400 an ounce threshold. We all remember a time when gold was just $450 an ounce. Today it's $4,000 an ounce. I don't know who will wager that it will remain at $4,000 an ounce and for how long. I suspect you have to be a betting man or a betting woman to do that, and I could regale you with a long list of examples of commodity prices and other freight prices. You know freight prices. You have seen how freight prices have skyrocketed over the last 5 years. And so we must never forget that we live in a very uncertain and unpredictable world. And we know this as a government. And as a responsible government that recognizes the reality that we're living in this unpredictable world, and as a government that recognizes, as a government that takes its responsibilities seriously, and not only its responsibilities today and tomorrow, but its responsibilities next year and the year after that, and not only its responsibilities in this term of office, but in the next term and in the term after that, and not only its responsibilities to this generation, but to the generation after this. We, as a responsible government, have to be mindful of these global realities. And so, as a commodity-producing economy, still a small open economy operating in a still very unpredictable and uncertain global environment, what are the things that matter most to ensure that we protect and preserve, that we ensure not only our survival, but that we ensure our continued success and the realization of our prosperity, notwithstanding these uncertainties, long into the future. This is what a responsible government must do, and this is what President Ali's government, as a responsible government, is doing. So what are the things that, or what are some of the things that matter, that are paramount? What are some of the things that are paramount in ensuring that we navigate the future to ensure our success as a country and your success as investors in this country? I'm going to mention just a few. There may be others that you can think of, but I will just mention a few. The first is that we must never underestimate the importance of preserving the democratic credentials of our country and preserving our standing in the international community, including the integrity of our financial system as part of an unavoidably integrated global financial and economic system. We must never take that for granted. All of this success and prosperity that we're celebrating, correctly so, we would be amazed at how quickly this would disappear if the democratic credentials of our country were ever to be allowed to be undermined, that we allowed ourselves to run the risk of becoming a pariah state, or a state isolated by those who traditionally have been our friends. And in this regard, I must, of course, give special acknowledgement to Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States of America to Guyana, who is a friend, not only as Ambassador of the United States of America to Guyana, but has been a good friend to all of us in Guyana. We must not... Did I stop somebody from applauding Ambassador? I shouldn't. We must not take for granted how important it is. We must never take for granted, we must never be flippant about preserving the democratic credentials of our country, maintaining and further enhancing our standing in the international community, protecting and preserving our friendly relations with important partners, including the United States of America and, of course, others, and protecting, preserving, and further consolidating the integrity of our financial system. We must never take those things for granted. We must never take for granted the importance of macroeconomic stability and macroeconomic resilience. We must never take those things for granted. And when we speak of a resilient economy, we are speaking, of course, of an economy that has strong institutional structures, including now, as an oil and gas producer, an economy with a strong natural resource fund, a strong sovereign wealth fund, with clear and transparent governance arrangements and clear and transparent rules for the management of the resources in that fund. And we stand today as one of very few countries in the world that can say that we have accumulated in our sovereign wealth fund enough resources to be able to pay off the entire external debt of our country and still have cash remaining. And that's a very, very rare circumstance to be in. That notwithstanding that we are utilizing revenues generated by the oil and gas sector to implement an accelerated public investment program, that we have still managed to accumulate enough savings to exceed our country's external debt. But also, when we speak of resilience, we're speaking also of an economy that is more diversified and needs to be more diversified. Because we know that resilience can only be achieved if we diversify the sources of growth and the sources of our macroeconomic and fiscal strength. And so you will hear us speaking incessantly about the importance of the non-oil economy, and importantly, the importance of a globally competitive non-oil economy. And you are an important part of ensuring that that is realized. Each and every one of you, whether you are manufacturing beverages or dairy products, whether you are a provider of services, advisory services, transportation and construction, whether you're in tourism, irrespective of the sector in which you're operating, you too have an important role in this mission to ensure that we realize a globally competitive, and I emphasize that because it's one thing to be producing something, some goods or services, but to be producing it in such a manner as to be pleasing ourselves that we are producing something and feel good about it. But our aim has to be to ensure that whatever we produce is globally competitive, that we are doing it competitively. And I was happy to hear, I think Rafiq made reference to it in his speech, the importance of manufacturing. How critical a globally competitive manufacturing sector is to a globally competitive economy as a whole. Rafiq spoke extensively about that. And so you will see in our fiscal priorities a very significant reorientation of the budget away from government consumption and towards investment in economic infrastructure that is critical to competitiveness. So in 2020, when we came into office, the public investment budget in 2019, if I might use that as the reference here. In 2019, the public investment component, the capital budget, or the public investment component of the budget, accounted for less than 25% of the total budget. In 2024, the public investment component, or the capital budget, accounted for more than 50% of the overall national budget, because of a deliberate policy position that we've taken, that we will not engage in inefficient government consumption, growing our recurrent budget, but instead we will focus on investing in the things that matter for long-term economic growth and for long-term prosperity and for long-term competitiveness. And I'm saying this because there are some hard choices that are involved in these decisions, because investing in the things that matter for the long term are not necessarily the things that are most popular in the short term. But you have in President Ali's government a government that will not sacrifice the long-term well-being of our country at the altar of short-term or immediate-term expediency. We recognize, of course, the importance of meeting immediate-term, near-term needs, but we will not compromise the long-term well-being, the long-term health and well-being and prosperity of our country. And right there, striking the right balance between addressing short-term imperatives, which, like I said, we understand sometimes might be the most politically popular thing to do today. Striking the right balance between short-term imperatives and what matters for the long term. As obvious as it might seem, is not necessarily a trivial task. It requires an explicit policy position. It requires strong leadership and strong government to ensure that the right decisions are made so that that balance can be realized. Ensuring fiscal sustainability. We know, and many of us in this room, not everybody, but many of us in this room can remember a time when Guyana's debt to GDP ratio was more than 600%, making us one of the most heavily indebted countries in the world. And we were able, as a government, the previous People's Progressive Party civic government, the pre-2015 government, we were able to bring down Guyana's debt to GDP ratio from 600% where it was in 1990 to less than 40% by 2014, before a single drop of oil was produced and a single dollar was earned, obviously, from the oil industry, there not being a single drop of oil having been produced. We were able to bring down the debt to GDP ratio to 38%, in fact. And we have since been able to bring the debt to GDP ratio further down to under 25%. At the end of last year, it stood at 24.3%, making us now one of the least indebted countries in the world, and certainly in the Western Hemisphere. And these things matter. Sound policies matter. Responsible management matters. There are other dimensions too. For example, we live in a world today where you could scarcely be oblivious to the reality of climate change. You could scarcely ignore, or you ignore at your own peril, the reality of climate change. We've seen it. We saw the devastation caused by hurricanes and other natural disasters, including so recently in our own region, in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, and elsewhere and nearby. We would ignore climate change at our own peril. And it really would be difficult to have any serious conversation about sustainability and long-term viability without being at least conscious of climate change and environmental realities. And here again, as a result of hard work and sound policies, we've been able to position Guyana at the forefront of the global effort to fight climate change, and in particular, to position Guyana, to place Guyana in a position of intellectual and thought leadership, particularly on the subject of standing forests and their role and their role in the fight against climate change. And here I refer, of course, to the low carbon development strategy, which has yielded significant revenue to our country. In its first generation, it resulted in our country being eligible to earn $250 million under a bilateral transaction with the Kingdom of Norway. We ended up earning almost the full $250 million, I think about $236 million. And then we developed under President Ali's leadership after he assumed office, the second generation low carbon development strategy. And this is the LCDS 2030. And this LCDS 2030 has since earned us, we've done more than one transaction, but you would perhaps be best aware of the transaction with the Hess Corporation, under which we have concluded a transaction which will see us being paid $750 million over a specified period for our certified carbon credits. I think that's deserving of some applause, Ambassador Rowland. And these are huge achievements that we must not, they're not trivial, these are non-trivial. They're achievements of considerable magnitude. And they did not happen by accident, and they did not happen by good luck or fortunate circumstances. And so, I want to reiterate to you, because you are going to the bank, all of you, you're putting your assets up as collateral, you are raising financing at risk, you are investing in risky enterprises. For the greater part, you are succeeding in the management of those resources, and you're earning a more than respectable rate of return. But you know, I shouldn't say but, and therefore, you know how important it is, and will continue to be, for the right policies to be in place to ensure that you are able to continue to grow your businesses, and so that you are able to continue to generate rates of return that can meet the required or expected return on your capital and earn you a significant profit after that, because this is what you're in business for, and this is what we want you to achieve. And so I want you to know, as people who have invested, who have borrowed or otherwise raised capital, and as people who have invested that capital, and as people who want to continue to grow your businesses, I have no doubt that you will want to continue to service your capital, you will want to continue to earn an acceptable rate of return, you will want to continue to grow your business, whether the oil price is $138 a barrel, or $98 a barrel, or $68 a barrel. I'm not going to call any numbers lower than that. But I know that you are not investing on the assumption that oil prices will always be $98 a barrel. You live in the real world, and you are smart, astute business people. This is why you're in this room. I want you to know that you have in President Ali's government, and under President Irfan Ali's leadership, you have a government that will always work hard to ensure that our economy continues to grow, that will always work hard to ensure that our economy is resilient, can withstand shocks, including commodity price shocks, that will do all that is necessary to ensure that we realize this economic diversification of which we speak. And I repeat that you have an important role to play in that regard, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I want you to know, and I wanted to use this, I didn't want to come today to give you the usual euphoric speech about how great things are, because things are great and you know this, and I know that you know this. I didn't want to come and give the usual euphoric speech. I wanted to say to you that we are mindful of the realities of the world in which we live, and I want you to feel comfortable and to know that in this government we are mindful of the risks. We have done every scenario plus a few more, and we have crafted a policy framework to ensure that the Guyanese economy remains strong and resilient and prosperous for the long term, so that you can continue to invest and grow your businesses and continue to make money for the long term. I wanted you to know that. You must never hesitate to applaud when I am at the podium. I saw this young lady start to applaud, and then she hesitated. I want to assure you, I will not take offense if you applaud while I'm at the podium. But I want you to know that. And I want to ask you to think about these things. Because it's very easy to get carried away with, like I said, we live in the era of instantaneity and promises and counter-promises and who will do more and who, I know that you know what I'm speaking about. And promises and out-promises and who will do more and who will do it more quickly. This is not, you can't manage a country and grow an economy on the basis of sound bites. Responsible policy making requires, it's okay to have a sound bite here and there. We all have a politician too. We wouldn't say no to a little soundbite or something that will get us a bit of traction. But responsible policy making requires serious analysis of the environment in which you're operating and the development of a robust policy framework to ensure prosperity into the medium term. And this is President Ali's commitment to all of you. You know, there's nothing that I can tell you about what you need to do. I will conclude with an analogy that some of you, well, maybe I shouldn't repeat it because I've said it, it's a story that I've told on many occasions. I'm not going to tell it today. I will save it maybe for a later occasion, by which time most of you would have forgotten that I've used it before. But if I were to, like I said, I would not be presumptuous. You all run successful businesses. This is why you're in this room tonight. But if I were to be presumptuous enough to dare to give you a word of advice or a word of guidance or whatever you want to call it, I would say to you that I would invoke some words that President Ali has used on multiple occasions when he has said that this is not the age or the era for business as usual. That in this period it is imperative that we all examine what we are doing, examine how we can do it differently and better, that we analyze what are the new opportunities, the emergent opportunities that lie ahead. This is the period in which we have to do that. We can't simply, in this period, we will be left behind if we believe that we can simply do what we have always been doing and that we're going to get by and survive and succeed like that, because we're not. Those who will succeed or succeed most will be those who are proactive in analyzing, just like we have done in government, the global environment in which we're operating, analyzing and identifying the opportunities that lie ahead, and positioning yourselves to take advantage of those opportunities. The world is changing, and Guyana is changing even more rapidly. We are changing as a country at meteoric speed. Meteoric speed. You know the numbers. We started with 120,000 barrels of oil per day. We're at 900,000 barrels of oil per day today. We're going to get up to 1.3 million barrels of oil per day by the end of the decade. Meteoric speed. And if you believe that the growth that we've seen over the last 5 years, and you know to yourselves how your respective businesses have grown, and if you believe that the growth of the last 5 years was rapid, the growth over the next 5 years will be even more rapid. And so, it's imperative that you consider, and you are best placed to do this far better than we are, where we are going as a country, what the new and emergent opportunities are likely to be, and what you need to do to take advantage of those opportunities. And secondly, I would add that changing what we do must necessarily involve not only producing something else or producing it using new technology, but changing how we operate in a number of other respects. We have a long and distinguished tradition of family-owned businesses in Guyana. Many of them are in the room, and many of them started, I think somebody commented at the table while I heard a comment made at my table when the prizes were being handed out, that most businesses in Guyana started out as a small family-owned business and grew to the size that it has achieved today. In fact, I think even the founders, the people who received the awards for 62 years of membership, those businesses, today almost all of them are massive conglomerates, but they started out as a small family-owned business. I know that we have a long-standing tradition of family-owned businesses, but when we consider doing things differently and doing them better, we must also consider whether the model of the family-owned business is the right model for us to grow beyond a certain size. It will serve you well, but beyond a certain size, if you want to grow more rapidly, it is inevitable that you will have to confront such questions as whether and how do I bring in external capital, whether and how I engage in strategic partnerships. And President Ali has been a champion of the consortium model of doing business, and we have seen how that model has worked successfully in Guyana with the number of Guyanese companies that are entering strategic partnerships with companies from the rest of the world, including to take advantage of our local content framework, which has leveraged Guyanese capital to bring in international expertise to be able to take advantage of the new opportunities in the oil and gas sector. When we speak of doing things differently, we must think too, and I was very happy, I'm trying to remember who spoke about it. I can't remember who, but somebody spoke about, it was our good friend from Masegas, who spoke about quality and standards. Because in today's era, if we are going to do business with the rest of the world, if we're going to do business with the oil and gas sector, the big multinationals that are operating in the oil and gas sector right here in Guyana, we cannot do so if we are oblivious to standards and to quality. They require. This is part of the modern world. Welcome to the modern world. And in a competitive world, standards and quality do matter. And so I was very happy when the CEO of Massigas, or the representative of Massigas, my apologies, spoke of standards and quality. And this applies to everybody in the room. Doing things differently, including doing them in a manner that is globally competitive and that complies with global standards and at a global level of quality. But like I said, it's not my intention to dispense advice. I am hardly in a position to give advice to you. You are all running successful businesses. Many of you have established businesses that have grown to be successful. So it would be beyond me to pretend that I'm in any position to dispense advice to you on how to run a business. I will simply end by saying to you once again, by repeating only for emphasis, that in this government, in this People's Progressive Party civic government, led by President Irfan Ali, you have a government that is committed to maintaining the environment that is essential for your long-term, not just survival, for your long-term success and your long-term prosperity. And that requires sound and responsible government and careful, I'm loath to repeat the words, but that requires sound and responsible policy making. And that more often than not, does not necessarily mean that which is the most popular thing in the short term. You have our commitment that we will continue to do all that is necessary to protect your long-term interests. Congratulations on all that you've achieved. I see Anand Harilal smiling there. It looks like he feels shortchanged because he got the short version of my speech today. I apologize for shortchanging you today. But congratulations on all that you've achieved collectively as the GMSA and individually in your respective businesses. And best of luck as you too navigate this incredibly exciting time in our country's economic history. Thank you very much.